Okay, hopefully you can hear me. So we're going to do Opener 12, and we're going to learn about factoring. We've talked about it a little bit before, but factoring is just the process of undistributing, much like if you have x squared equals 16 and you want to undo the square, you square root. That's the same here. If you want to undo distributing, you'll notice that in the example here, 3 times 5 is 15. 3 times negative 2x is negative 6x. If you want to now undo that, what you're looking for is this 3, right? How do you decide to pull the 3 out, to undo it? Well, you're looking for the things that are common between these. So if you think about it, 15 is just 3 times 5 minus 2 times 3 times x. And so what they both have in common is the 3. And so you're going to undistribute it. You're going to pull it out. So you'll pull the 3 out, and you're left with the 5 minus 2x. So this is what factoring is. It's just undistributing. So we're going to try to factor the following. And there's going to be a couple ways we look at it. One that's going to be more advantageous than the other, but still, another way known as nested factoring also exists. So to factor this, I'm looking for what do all three have in common? This is 5 times x times x times x plus 4 times 5 times x plus 5 times 20. And I conveniently chose those, right? That wasn't just a random choice. I suppose I could think of this as 5 times 2 times 2 times 5 if you'd like, and the 4 I could think of as 2 times 2 times 5 if you'd like. And so now I'm looking for what do they all have in common. Notice they don't all have an x. 2 of them have an x. In fact, 2 of them have a 2 and a 5. So there's a couple ways. What I'm going to be looking for and what's going to be most useful for you to know how to do is to factor things out of all the terms. So in this case it would be a 5, and you're left with x cubed plus 4 x squared plus 5 times 2 times 2, 20 plus 20. So that's one way of looking at that factor. Now, like I said, there's a couple other things we could have looked at from a nested perspective. I just wanted to factor those two and leave the last term alone. Those both have a 5 and an x. So if I wanted to do that, I could have said this is 5x times x squared plus, now I'm going to take a 5 and 1x, so I'm left with 4x. And then close the parentheses because that's all the 5x is factored out of, plus 100. So that's called a nested factoring. It's not, in this particular case, very useful, and what we're going to be doing in this class very useful, but still something to be looked for. Likewise, I could have looked for, let's take a different color, red. Could have looked for nested factoring there. So I leave the 5x cubed alone, plus, and now I'm going to factor. Those both have a 2 and a 5. So I'm going to factor out a 10. And what I'm left with is 2x squared plus 10. And the way I know that works is if I were to redistribute, I would get the same thing out of either this item or this one or this one. Now the one in black is the one we're going to be looking for more often. So that's the one we should get used to. What do they all have in common? So looking at number 2, what do they all have in common? Well, this is 7 times 11 times x times x times x times x x. And you're going to eventually get good enough at this where you don't need to write it out. Plus 7 times 2 times x times x times x plus 7 times 2 times 2 times x. What do they have in common? They all seem to have a 7. They all seem to have an x. So that's what I'm pulling out, 7x. What's left now is 11 exponents. 4 plus 2x squared plus 4. So that would be the factor form for that. So hopefully that gives you some sense of how to start factoring out. We'll talk about factoring and factoring out, and they kind of mean the same thing, but factoring out is looking for things that all three have in common and pulling them out, and we'll start getting into factoring a trinomial, something with three terms, and factoring it into two binomials being multiplied together. So that's often how you'll think of factoring, but this is also factoring, known as factoring out.